Greetings everyone, I'm Detective STARBORN, and I'm glad to see you on my YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you, and enjoy watching. A 19-year-old girl was found dead in her own apartment. Investigators began their investigation and quickly uncovered several disturbing factors, but they were unable to solve the case for several years. When the truth came to light, everyone was shocked and outraged by such a turn of events, as absolutely no one expected this outcome. Nona Dirksmeyer was born on December 26, 1985, in the American city of Russellville, Arkansas. The girl grew up in a very large family with 4 brothers and 1 sister. When Nona was 10 years old, her father passed away. This event was a tragedy for the entire family, but an even more horrific shock awaited them. Sometime later, the girl confessed to her mother that her father had repeatedly subjected her to abuse. She was afraid to talk about it while he was alive, and her confession came as a real shock to her mom. The woman had no idea what her husband had been doing. Despite such a tragic experience, Nona found the strength to move forward, and later even decided to help other girls who had become victims of similar crimes. For this purpose, she joined a volunteer organization where she provided support to children who needed it. During her school years, Nona began dating a boy named Kevin. The girl also participated in beauty pageants, achieving serious success in this direction. Nona won several local competitions, which allowed her to compete for the title of State Beauty Queen. In addition, the girl actively participated in local church life and sang in the choir. After high school, when Nona was 19, she and her boyfriend enrolled at the University of Arkansas, located in her hometown. The girl also decided to rent her own apartment as she wanted to start an independent life. After completing their first year, her boyfriend decided to change his major and transferred to another university, which was an hour-and-a-half drive from their city. By that time, the couple had been dating for about 5 years, and they would be living in different cities for the first time. On December 14, 2005, Kevin returned home for Christmas break. He stopped by Nona's place before heading to his parents' house, which was several miles from the city. The next day, they both had plans. Nona had to take 2 final exams and meet with a girl from the volunteer organization. Kevin was planning to drive his mom, who worked as a librarian, to a school event. On the morning of December 15th, at around 9 o'clock, Nona sent her boyfriend a message wishing him a good day. Kevin waited for her to call him after the exams to let him know how everything went, but the girl didn't get in touch. She also wasn't responding to his message, and the boy began to worry. At around 6 in the evening, he drove his mom to the school event, but he couldn't shake the thought of why Nona hadn't answered her phone all day. Eventually, Kevin decided to call his friend. He worked as a pizza delivery driver in the area where Nona's apartment complex was located. Kevin asked him to drive by her place and check if everything was okay. His friend quickly went there and saw that Nona's car was in the parking lot and the lights were on in her apartment windows, but no one answered the door, and he told Kevin about this. Then, the young man told his mom that he was worried about his girlfriend and wanted to drive to her apartment to check if everything was all right. The woman agreed, and they headed to the apartment complex together. Kevin's friend was waiting for them there, and all 3 began knocking on the door, but there was still no answer. The boy had a key, but that day he had left it at home since he hadn't planned to stop by Nona's. A few minutes later, Kevin and his friend tried to open the front door, as they thought something bad might have happened to the girl. But they couldn't get in, and then the boy remembered there were sliding glass doors at the back of the apartment. When he approached them, he immediately noticed something strange. Nona took her security seriously, so every time she stayed home alone, she would put a special removable security bar on the back glass door. These are mainly used against burglars. They're easy to install and remove from inside the house, but very difficult to remove from the outside. But this time, the security bar wasn't there, and the doors themselves were unlocked. Upon entering the apartment, they immediately noticed blood on the blinds, and a shocking scene awaited them in the bedroom. Nona was lying face down in a pool of blood, wearing nothing but socks. Kevin rushed to her and tried to lift her up, but immediately realized she was dead. Meanwhile, his mother called the police. Investigators arrived at the apartment and began examining the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the girl had been struck several times in the head with a table lamp that was lying on the floor. They also found a smeared, bloody fingerprint on the lamp itself, assuming it could have been left by the killer. Next to the victim's body, they found her phone with the battery removed. On the bedside table, investigators also discovered an empty contraceptive wrapper. After examining all doors and windows, they found no signs of forced entry. Medical examiners studied the victim's body and confirmed that the table lamp was used as a weapon. She had received several blows to the head, and the metal base of the lamp matched these injuries. Additionally, the girl had sustained multiple stab wounds. According to the pathologist's opinion, death occurred between 10:30 in the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon. However, experts found no signs of sexual assault, which greatly puzzled the detectives. Given that the victim was unclothed, they initially thought about sexual motives for this crime. However, experts acknowledged that the perpetrator might have used the contraceptive found in the apartment. In such a case, establishing the fact of assault would have been practically impossible. As a result, the police had no evidence, but soon an interesting detail emerged. The crime scene examination had been conducted rather negligently. The investigators didn't take blood samples from the blinds on the back door. They didn't lift fingerprints from them and didn't even look for footprints in the apartment that could also have been used as evidence. Moreover, they didn't even go up to the second floor of the apartment. Such oversights by the police were explained by one simple fact. Almost immediately after they arrived at the scene, investigators found their suspect, the victim's boyfriend. The first thing that made them think about Kevin's involvement in the murder was the fact that the young man had a large amount of Nona's blood on him. When the boy entered the apartment and ran to her, he tried to lift her up, and upon realizing she was dead, he hugged and held her close. The police considered such behavior strange and assumed Kevin did this intentionally. By hugging the victim and getting covered in her blood, the boy could have destroyed potential evidence and compromised the crime scene, making it harder for investigators to prove his guilt. For example, if they found the victim's blood on Kevin's clothes or under his feet, this could be easily explained by the fact that he hugged the victim after discovering her body. Another suspicious detail was that Kevin didn't go to check on his girlfriend alone, but brought his mom along. Additionally, he called his friend to the apartment. Investigators suspected that this way he provided himself with two witnesses who found the body with him and saw how he got covered in her blood. The police talked to Kevin for a long time right outside Nona's apartment, and from their questions, the young man realized they considered him a suspect. Then he said something that made the investigators even more convinced he was the killer. Realizing he was a suspect, Kevin began arguing with the investigators and mentioned that he constantly watches Law and Order and knows they're trying to make him look guilty. These words also seemed strange to the police. In addition to this, they learned that only 3 people had a key to Nona's apartment: the girl herself, her mother, and Kevin. Given that no signs of forced entry were found, they assumed that the boy had used his copy of the key to enter the apartment. Kevin was taken to the station for questioning. For several hours, he explained his version of the day's events and insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. Meanwhile, the investigators were now directly accusing him of this and suggesting he confess to what he had done. During the interrogation, another fact emerged that the police found strange. At around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after numerous attempts to reach the girl, Kevin sent her a message asking, "Are you alive?" Given that Nona was dead at that point, investigators found this suspicious. However, the boy didn't request a lawyer and tried to answer all questions. The investigators talked to him for several hours, constantly increasing the pressure. Towards the end, they not only directly accused him of murder, but also manipulated the facts. The detectives repeatedly told him there was irrefutable evidence against him, and the only way to help his case was to confess to everything. After the police left the interrogation room and left him alone, Kevin stood up and began hitting the back of the chair with his fists. For the investigator, this became another sign that the young man had violent tendencies and could have committed murder. Nevertheless, in reality, the police didn't have a single piece of evidence that could link Kevin to the murder. Medical experts determined that Nona had tried to fight off her attacker. This meant that the killer should have scratches and abrasions on their body, but none were found on Kevin. The detectives still continued to consider him guilty and tried to find evidence. They interviewed more than 50 people, hoping to find any witnesses, but all this yielded no results. However, after talking with Nona's friends, the police learned something important. It turned out that shortly before her death, the girl had begun secretly dating another boy without Kevin's knowledge. The investigators immediately checked this person, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. This fact added even more suspicion toward Kevin, as now he had a motive. The young man could have shown up at Nona's home unannounced and seen the empty contraceptive wrapper. Realizing that the girl was cheating on him, the boy could have killed her in a fit of rage, then fled the scene and devised a plan to avoid responsibility. This version matched the nature of injuries inflicted on the victim. She was killed with extreme brutality, which in most similar cases indicates the killer's strong personal animosity toward the victim. In the following days, Kevin agreed to take a polygraph test. After its completion, the operator concluded that the young man had given many false answers. One of the investigators even stated that this was the worst polygraph result in his 28-year career. However, there was one nuance here. The person who read the instrument readings wasn't a certified specialist. He was just a regular police officer who hadn't received the necessary training to work with this tool. But this didn't bother the detectives. After the interrogation, they again started pressuring Kevin, trying to force a confession. They told him that all his acquaintances and relatives already knew that he was the one who killed Nona. The police were actually telling everyone that Kevin's guilt was practically proven and he would soon be arrested. They convinced the victim's parents that he had killed their daughter, although they had refused to believe it until the very end. The day before the funeral, there was supposed to be a farewell ceremony at the church, and Kevin had been helping organize it since early morning. Later that day, the detectives called him in for questioning again, promising to release him before the ceremony began. In the end, the young man spent 7 hours at the police station and missed the ceremony. None of those present knew that he was being interrogated. Therefore, many thought Kevin didn't come because of guilt over what he had done. Nona's parents didn't even want the boy to come to the funeral, since by that time the investigators had already convinced them of his involvement in the murder. But Kevin came anyway and sat far away from her relatives. By that time, experts had finished examining the evidence that police had taken from the victim's apartment. Upon examining the light bulb in the table lamp, they found a fingerprint belonging to Kevin. It was left in Nona's blood. This suggested that the fingerprint could only have appeared during or after the murder. For the investigators, this became the only available evidence, but they continued digging into Kevin for several more months, hoping to find more proof. They weren't successful, so on March 31st, 2006, they decided to try to secure a conviction with the existing evidence. The young man was arrested and charged with murder. At that time, many residents continued to believe he was guilty, so Kevin's lawyers first requested to move the trial to another county. They feared that jurors might be biased against their client and return a guilty verdict without sufficient evidence. This request was granted, and the trial began in another city. The defense brought in a witness who provided Kevin with a fairly solid alibi. That morning, a plumber had come to his parents' house, and he saw the young man there at around 10:30 in the morning. The prosecution insisted that Kevin could have still managed to drive to Nona's and commit the murder, since according to medical experts, she died between 10:30 and 1 o'clock. They also presented a very interesting fact. It turned out that Kevin's phone was turned off between 10:30 and 12 o'clock. This time frame coincided with the time of the victim's murder. Moreover, data from Kevin's phone showed that he only started calling his girlfriend at 4:30, although during interrogations he had insisted he had been trying to contact her all day. However, at the time, the young man might have been referring to not just calls, but messages as well. But the lawyers presented two more witnesses whose testimonies disproved the possibility of committing this murder. One of them was Kevin's grandmother. She said that on that day, she saw her grandson near a gas station and gave him some money to get a snack at a cafe. Another witness saw the young man between 12:30 and 1 o'clock near a restaurant. The establishment's cameras recorded him having lunch. Thus, the young man simply wouldn't have had time to commit the murder and return. The lawyers also challenged the fact that Kevin could have left the bloody fingerprint on the lamp during the murder itself. In that case, by the time the body was discovered, the blood should have dried. But the experts who arrived at the apartment that evening wrote in their report that the bloody fingerprint was slightly damp. This confirmed that Kevin could have left it accidentally when he found Nona's body with his mother and friend. But that wasn't all. It turned out that fingerprints were also found on the base of the table lamp that was used to strike the victim. However, these didn't belong to Kevin, and checking them against databases yielded no results. The lawyers insisted that these fingerprints belonged to the real killer. The lawyers also pointed out that the police had done their job extremely poorly from the first minutes. They hadn't examined the entire apartment, which meant they could have missed many potential pieces of evidence. The medical examiner who examined the victim's body testified at the trial, and here, all trial participants were in for a very interesting statement. He determined that the victim's body had been lying on its back for some time after death, before being turned face down. This could indicate that the girl had indeed been sexually assaulted. The expert confirmed that he found no direct evidence of this, but added that he couldn't rule out such a scenario. And finally, the lawyers presented their trump card. According to the prosecution's official statement, no fingerprints or DNA were found on the empty contraceptive wrapper found near the victim's body. But the lawyers ordered a second test, and this time, experts discovered male DNA. Analysis showed it didn't belong to Kevin, and checking it against databases yielded no results. The trial lasted more than a year, but in July 2007, the jury reached their verdict. They found Kevin not guilty of Nona's murder due to lack of evidence. For the victim's relatives, who had believed him to be the killer from the first weeks, this decision came as a shock. They continued to believe that Kevin was responsible for her death and that he had now managed to avoid responsibility. Despite their client being acquitted, the team of lawyers promised to continue working on the case and find the real killer. Given that the police had been fixated on Kevin, no one expected them to finally approach their work responsibly. First, they managed to have the DNA from the contraceptive wrapper compared with all men who knew Nona. All these people voluntarily provided their samples, and none of them matched. This continued for 2 months until something unexpected happened in September 2007. Police arrested a man named Gary Dunn for robbery. And here's where things got interesting. First, this man had already been convicted of attacking another woman. Second, he lived in the same apartment complex as Nona. Third, in the early stages of the investigation, police had considered him a suspect, but quickly switched their focus to Kevin because they believed he was the killer. Considering all this, the boys' lawyers requested a DNA test, and here came the long-awaited breakthrough. The sample from the contraceptive wrapper matched Gary's DNA. It turned out that after the girl's murder, investigators had even given him a polygraph test. Gary, who was 26 years old at the time, passed it completely, although in that case, the test was also conducted by an uncertified specialist. Moreover, none of them had even verified this person's alibi. At the time, Gary said that during the murder, he had been shopping with his mother. After his DNA matched the sample from the victim's apartment, investigators finally bothered to check this information, and the alibi turned out to be false. Gary had indeed gone shopping with his mother, except not at the time of the murder, but 2 days before. This was confirmed by store receipts showing the purchase date, and Gary had even shown these to the police, but they simply didn't pay attention to such important information. They saw that the dates on the receipts didn't match the day of the murder. This was documented in their reports, but for some inexplicable reason, they either didn't give it importance or somehow failed to notice that the days didn't match up. Finally, experts compared his fingerprints with those found on Nona's table lamp, and they matched. However, a serious problem arose here. The DNA fingerprints matched, but not 100%. The judicial system has specific standards that establish the necessary match percentages to determine guilt. In Gary's case, these percentages were insufficient, although there was practically no chance that the DNA and fingerprints belonged to someone else. And here, the investigators were very likely to blame. First, they hadn't examined all available evidence immediately after the murder as required by protocol. It's possible that the DNA sample had deteriorated somewhat before it was properly examined a year after the murder. Secondly, the police could have missed many other pieces of evidence since they simply didn't examine the entire apartment. As soon as detectives received all this information, they arrested Gary and charged him with Nona's murder. Notably, at the time of her death, the man was on parole. In 2002, he had attacked a woman who was jogging in the park, knocked her to the ground, and began beating her. He also told her he was going to kill her. The woman managed to break free and ran to her car. Meanwhile, Gary fled the scene but was quickly found. The man spent 19 months in prison before being released early. Notably, his DNA sample hadn't been entered into the database. The trial of Gary began in April 2010, and there were many interesting developments awaiting everyone. His own wife testified against him as a witness, revealing that he was an aggressive and dangerous person. Gary regularly raised his hand against her, and the woman seriously feared for her life, which is why she was afraid to leave him. But the most interesting part was that a few weeks before the victim's death, she saw her husband peeping through the window of Nona's apartment. Based on this, the prosecution suggested that the man had planned to attack her in advance. Given his criminal history, Gary clearly had a propensity for violence. He could have been watching Nona for a long time since she lived just a few meters away from him, and on December 15th, he decided to act. Apparently, he knocked on her door and entered under some made-up pretext. There, he grabbed the table lamp and struck her several times, then sexually assaulted and killed her. Because Gary used contraception, medical experts simply couldn't say for certain whether the victim had been sexually assaulted, but all facts pointed to this. Gary's lawyers denied his involvement. However, the man had no real alibi, so they focused on trying to make Kevin look guilty. According to the lawyers, the boy had found out that his girlfriend was cheating on him and killed her. Kevin even had to testify in court and listen to how they tried to portray him as the real criminal. Unfortunately, the prosecution couldn't use Gary's DNA fingerprints as evidence, even though their match was practically conclusive. As a result, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision, and the trial was declared a mistrial. A new trial wasn't long in coming, and its key difference was testimony from the woman whom Gary had nearly killed in 2002. She described how the man had attacked her and how she had miraculously managed to escape. Despite this, the second trial also ended in a deadlock, as the jurors couldn't reach a common decision. As a result, Gary Dunn walked free, even though his guilt was practically obvious. But just a few years later, the man finally earned himself a prison sentence. In 2018, when Gary was 39, he committed 2 different crimes in one day. First, he tried to kidnap a woman from a church parking lot, but she managed to fight him off. A few hours later, Gary undressed in front of another woman in a shopping center parking lot and was soon arrested. Given his criminal history and the fact that he was almost certainly Nona's killer, the court decided to give him the maximum sentence. Gary received 15 years in prison for these 2 incidents, and he continues to serve his sentence to this day. Although he has the right to apply for parole, authorities are unlikely to grant him such an opportunity. Moreover, they have the right to charge him with Nona's murder for a 3rd time. However, they're not rushing to do this. The probability that a new trial would end the same way as the previous two is very high. Therefore, investigators are trying to gather more evidence and prepare a stronger case against Gary. As for Kevin, after everything that happened, he took up studying law and in 2011 filed a lawsuit against two police officers, the authorities of Russellville and Gary Dunn. The man claimed that they were trying to pin someone else's crime on him, ignoring many pieces of evidence and refusing to do their job properly. During the preparation for the trial, Kevin discovered that Gary's polygraph test results had actually also indicated deception, but investigators still didn't consider him a suspect. Unfortunately, his lawsuit was dismissed due to the statute of limitations. In the end, the negligent police officers bore no responsibility for the fact that the real killer had walked free for years and could be free again in just a few years. They also won't face punishment for the fact that all of Nona's acquaintances and relatives believed Kevin to be the killer for years, until just a few years ago when her parents finally stopped believing this and restored their relationship with Kevin. Today, the man works as a lawyer and strives to help those who suffer from police negligence or unprofessionalism. Thank you for watching this video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I look forward to your comments on this situation. That was Detective STARBORN. See you soon.